Marcus Thompson had always been the kind of man who believed his size and voice could solve any problem. At 6'3" with broad shoulders and a deep, commanding voice, he had spent most of his 35 years getting his way through intimidation rather than intelligence. His marriage to Sarah had started differently, but, over the past 5 years, it had slowly transformed into something ugly. The gym where Marcus worked as a personal trainer became his kingdom during the day. He strutted between the weight machines, barking orders at clients who paid good money to be yelled at. His reputation as a tough trainer brought in steady business, but it also fed something darker in his personality. Every day, he grew more convinced that strength meant dominance, and dominance meant control over everything and everyone around him. Sarah Thompson, meanwhile, had been quietly building a different kind of strength. While Marcus focused on his biceps and bench press records, she had been attending martial arts classes at a small dojo across town. What started as a way to get some exercise and clear her head had become something much more significant. Her instructor, Master Chen, was a small, elderly man who taught that true power came from discipline, technique, and knowing exactly when to use force. The problems in their marriage had been building for months. Marcus had become increasingly controlling, criticizing everything from how Sarah dressed to whom she spoke with at work. He monitored her phone, questioned her whereabouts, and made snide comments about her friends. Sarah worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and Marcus resented the respect she earned from her colleagues and patients. Tonight was supposed to be different. Sarah had finally worked up the courage to tell Marcus that she wanted a separation. She had spent weeks planning this conversation, knowing it would not go well. She had even spoken to a lawyer and found a small apartment where she could stay temporarily. Her bag was already packed and hidden in her car. The couple lived in a modest 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood. Their neighbors, the Johnsons, had grown accustomed to hearing raised voices from next door, but they had never seen any evidence of physical violence. Marcus was careful about that. His control was mostly psychological, though Sarah often caught him clenching his fists when he was particularly angry. As Sarah prepared dinner that evening, her hands trembled slightly as she rehearsed what she would say. She had written down key points on a piece of paper that she kept folded in her pocket. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the kitchen, but she barely noticed. Her mind was focused on the conversation ahead and the new life she hoped to build. Marcus arrived home at his usual time, slamming the front door behind him. He had had a particularly frustrating day at the gym. One of his longtime clients had decided to switch to a different trainer, claiming that Marcus was too aggressive. Another client had complained to the gym manager about his teaching methods. Marcus blamed everyone except himself for these problems. "Sarah," he called from the living room, his voice already carrying an edge of irritation. "Where's my protein shake? You know I need it right after I get home." Sarah took a deep breath and walked into the living room, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. Marcus was sprawled across their leather couch, still wearing his gym clothes and scrolling through his phone. He did not look up when she entered the room. "Marcus, we need to talk," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Not now," he replied without lifting his eyes from his phone. "I'm checking my messages. Some idiot at the gym thinks he knows better than me about training routines." "This is important," Sarah insisted, moving to stand directly in front of him. Marcus finally looked up, and Sarah could see the familiar storm clouds gathering in his expression. His jaw tightened, and his free hand formed a fist on his thigh. Sarah had seen these warning signs countless times before, but tonight she refused to back down. "Everything's important to you lately," Marcus said, his voice getting louder. "You think your little job at the hospital makes you some kind of expert on everything. You think you're better than me because you went to nursing school." Sarah felt her own anger rising but fought to keep it under control. Master Chen had taught her that emotional control was the foundation of physical control. She stood with her feet shoulder-width apart, her weight balanced, though Marcus would never recognize the defensive stance she had unconsciously adopted. "This isn't about my job," Sarah said calmly. "This is about us. About our marriage. I think we need to spend some time apart." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Marcus's phone slipped from his hand and clattered onto the coffee table. He stood up slowly, his full height and bulk looming over Sarah. In the past, this physical intimidation would have made her step back and apologize. Tonight, she held her ground. "Spend time apart?" Marcus repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "What kind of nonsense is that? You're my wife. We made vows. You don't get to just decide you want time apart." "People grow apart, Marcus," Sarah replied, her nursing training helping her maintain her composure even as her heart raced. "We're not the same people we were when we got married. We want different things now." Marcus began pacing in front of her, his hands opening and closing into fists. Sarah recognized this behavior pattern. He was working himself up to an explosion of anger, the kind that usually ended with him screaming at her until she apologized for whatever had upset him. "Different things?" he snarled. "You mean you want to run around with other men? Is that what this is about? Did some doctor at that hospital put ideas in your head?" "No, Marcus," Sarah said firmly. "This is about respect. About being treated like an equal partner instead of someone you can control." The word control hit Marcus like a slap. He stopped pacing and turned to face her fully, his face flushed red with anger. Sarah could see a vein pulsing in his forehead, and his breathing had become rapid and shallow. "Control," he shouted. "You think I'm controlling? I work my ass off every day to pay for this house, to give you everything you need, and you call me controlling? You're ungrateful, that's what you are. Ungrateful and selfish." Sarah had heard these accusations many times before. Usually, she would try to explain her feelings or attempt to calm him down. Tonight, she remained silent and let him rant. Master Chen had taught her that sometimes the best defense was to let an opponent exhaust himself with his own anger. Marcus continued his verbal assault for several minutes, pacing back and forth while listing all the ways Sarah had supposedly wronged him. He brought up old arguments, imagined slights, and twisted every kind gesture she had ever made into evidence of her selfishness. Sarah stood quietly, her breathing steady and her mind clear. Finally, Marcus seemed to run out of steam. He stopped pacing and glared at her, waiting for her usual apologies and promises to do better. Instead, Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded piece of paper with her talking points. "I've already found an apartment," she said calmly. "I'll be moving out this weekend. We can work out the details of the separation through lawyers." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at her as if she had suddenly grown a second head. In all their years together, Sarah had never been this direct or decisive. She had never presented him with a fait accompli instead of a request for his permission. "You what?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I've found an apartment," Sarah repeated, her voice growing stronger. "I've already put down a deposit. I'll be out of here by Sunday." Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and, finally, pure rage. Sarah saw the exact moment when his anger shifted from verbal to physical. His posture changed, his weight shifted to the balls of his feet, and his hands rose slightly from his sides. "Like hell you will," he growled, taking a step toward her. Sarah's training kicked in automatically. Without conscious thought, she shifted her own weight and adjusted her stance. Marcus was too angry to notice these subtle changes, but Sarah was now in a perfect defensive position. Years of practice had made these movements as natural as breathing. "You're not going anywhere," Marcus continued, moving closer. "You're my wife, and you'll do what I say. You'll call whoever you talk to about this apartment nonsense and cancel it. Then, you'll apologize for wasting my time with this ridiculous conversation." "No, Marcus," Sarah said quietly. "I won't." The simple refusal seemed to break something inside him. Marcus had built his entire identity around being in control, around having the final word in every situation. Sarah's calm defiance challenged everything he believed about himself and their relationship. "We'll see about that," he snarled, and Sarah saw his right leg shift backward slightly. In that split second, Sarah realized that Marcus was about to kick her. 5 years of psychological abuse was about to become physical violence. Time seemed to slow down as she watched him draw his leg back, preparing to strike. But Sarah was no longer the frightened, submissive woman Marcus thought he was married to. 3 years of martial arts training had taught her not just how to defend herself, but when. And, as Marcus's foot left the ground, heading toward her midsection, Sarah knew exactly what she was going to do about it. Marcus's kick came fast and hard, aimed directly at Sarah's stomach. In his mind, this single act of violence would end the conversation and restore his authority. He had never hit Sarah before, but his rage had finally overcome his restraint. He expected her to crumple, to beg forgiveness, to abandon any thoughts of leaving him. What happened instead would replay in Marcus's mind for years to come. As his foot flew toward her midsection, Sarah moved with fluid precision that came from countless hours of practice. Master Chen's voice echoed in her memory, "Do not meet force with force. Redirect. Use your opponent's energy against him." Sarah's left hand swept down in a graceful arc, deflecting Marcus's kick away from her body while her right hand shot forward in a lightning-fast counterstrike. Her palm connected perfectly with Marcus's solar plexus, the nerve center just below his ribcage. The technique, called iron palm in her martial arts training, required perfect timing and precise placement rather than brute strength. Sarah had practiced this exact movement thousands of times on training dummies and practice pads. The effect was immediate and devastating. Marcus's kick, robbed of its target, threw him off balance just as Sarah's counterstrike hit home. The palm strike compressed his diaphragm and disrupted his breathing, sending shockwaves through his entire nervous system. His body's automatic response was to double over and gasp for air, but Sarah wasn't finished. Following through with her training, Sarah pivoted on her left foot and used her right elbow in a short, sharp strike to Marcus's exposed neck. This second technique, known as a hammer strike, hit the pressure point where his neck met his shoulder. The combination of the palm strike and elbow strike created a cascade of effects throughout his body. Marcus's legs buckled beneath him. His vision blurred as his nervous system struggled to process the dual impacts. He tried to speak, to shout, to reassert his dominance, but no sound emerged except a strangled wheeze. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Thompson was completely helpless. Sarah stepped back smoothly, maintaining her defensive stance. She watched as her husband collapsed to his knees on their living room carpet, clutching his chest and struggling to breathe. Her own breathing remained steady and controlled. The entire exchange had lasted less than 3 seconds, but it had fundamentally altered the power dynamic in their relationship forever. "Marcus," Sarah said calmly, "are you all right?" The concern in her voice was genuine. Despite everything he had put her through, Sarah was still a nurse. Her professional instincts kicked in as she assessed his condition. The techniques she had used were designed to disable an attacker temporarily, not cause permanent damage. Marcus would recover fully within a few minutes, though his ego might take considerably longer to heal. Marcus tried to respond but could only manage a series of gasping sounds. His face had gone pale, and sweat beaded on his forehead. He looked up at Sarah with an expression of complete bewilderment. This woman, whom he had controlled and intimidated for years, had just neutralized him with an ease that defied his understanding of the world. Sarah remained standing over him, not gloating or taunting, but simply present and alert. Her martial arts training had taught her that the moments after a defensive encounter were often the most dangerous. An attacker's wounded pride might drive them to escalate the situation further. "Take slow, deep breaths," Sarah instructed, her nurse's training taking over. "You'll be fine in a minute or two. I hit pressure points, not vital organs." Marcus's breathing gradually began to normalize, but his confusion only deepened. How did Sarah know about pressure points? Where had she learned to move like that? In all their years together, he had never seen any evidence that she could defend herself. She had never mentioned martial arts classes or self-defense training. As the immediate physical effects of Sarah's counterattack began to fade, Marcus's anger returned. But now it was mixed with something he had rarely experienced in his adult life: genuine fear. He had just learned that his wife possessed skills he knew nothing about, and that his physical intimidation tactics would no longer work. What did you do to me?" Marcus managed to gasp out, his voice hoarse and uncertain. I defended myself, Sarah replied simply. You tried to kick me, so I stopped you. Marcus struggled to his feet, still unsteady but determined to regain some semblance of control over the situation. His gym-trained muscles, which he had always relied upon to dominate others, felt weak and unreliable. Sarah's precise strikes had targeted his body's control systems rather than trying to overpower his strength. Where did you learn to do that? Marcus demanded, though his voice lacked its usual commanding tone. I've been taking martial arts classes for 3 years, Sarah said matter-of-factly. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening when I told you I was working late at the hospital. The revelation hit Marcus like a second physical blow. For 3 years, Sarah had been secretly developing skills that could neutralize his primary method of control. She had been preparing for this confrontation while he remained completely oblivious to her activities. You lied to me, Marcus accused, though even he could hear how weak the accusation sounded under the circumstances. I protected myself, Sarah corrected. I knew that if you found out about my training, you would try to stop me. You've tried to control every other aspect of my life. Marcus attempted to move toward Sarah again, but she shifted her stance slightly, and he instinctively backed away. The casual display of readiness made it clear that their physical relationship had permanently changed. Sarah was no longer someone he could intimidate through size and aggression. This is ridiculous, Marcus blustered, trying to salvage his authority through volume since physical presence was no longer effective. You can't just attack your husband because you don't like what he's saying. You attacked me first, Marcus, Sarah pointed out calmly. I have the right to defend myself, even from my husband. Especially from my husband. The living room fell silent except for the sound of Marcus's still labored breathing. He looked around the space that had been his domain just minutes earlier, searching for some way to reassert his control. His eyes fell on his phone, still lying on the coffee table where he had dropped it. I should call the police, Marcus said, though he made no move toward the phone. You assaulted me. Sarah's expression didn't change. Go ahead. I'll tell them about your attempt to kick me, and I'll show them the evidence. What evidence? Marcus scoffed. Without breaking eye contact, Sarah pulled her own phone from her back pocket. The screen showed a recording that had been running for the past 15 minutes, capturing both the audio of their argument and, through the phone's front-facing camera, a partial view of their confrontation. I started recording as soon as I came in here to talk to you, Sarah explained. I knew you might become violent, so I wanted evidence. The recording clearly shows you attempting to kick me and me defending myself. Marcus stared at the phone in Sarah's hand as if it were a weapon pointed at him. In a way, it was. The recording represented proof of his attempt at domestic violence, evidence that could destroy his reputation and his business. His gym clients trusted him to teach them controlled aggression, not domestic abuse. You can't record me in my own house, Marcus protested weakly. Actually, I can, Sarah replied. This is my house too, and I have every right to document threats to my safety. Marcus sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. The reality of his situation was beginning to penetrate his anger and pride. Sarah had outmaneuvered him physically, legally, and strategically. She had spent years preparing for this confrontation while he had remained completely unaware of her planning. How long have you been planning this? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Planning to defend myself? Since the first time you raised your voice at me and made me afraid, Sarah answered honestly. Planning to leave? Since you started checking my phone and questioning every conversation I had with other people. Marcus looked up at her, and, for the first time, Sarah saw something other than anger or arrogance in his expression. She saw the beginning of understanding, perhaps even remorse. But she also knew that this moment of clarity might not last. Sarah, Marcus began, then stopped. He seemed to be struggling with words, perhaps for the first time in his adult life. Sarah waited patiently for him to continue, but she didn't relax her guard. Master Chen had taught her that an opponent was most dangerous when cornered, and Marcus was definitely cornered. His entire identity was built around being dominant and in control, and that identity was crumbling around him. The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of unspoken resentments and the sudden reversal of their power dynamic. Sarah could see Marcus processing what had just happened, trying to reconcile his image of his submissive wife with the capable woman standing before him. Finally, Marcus raised his head and looked directly at Sarah. What she saw in his eyes made her prepare for what was coming next. Marcus stared at Sarah with a mixture of fear, confusion, and something that might have been respect beginning to form in his eyes. The silence in their living room was profound, broken only by the distant sound of traffic outside and the steady tick of the wall clock that had marked countless arguments over the years. "Please don't leave," Marcus whispered, and the words seemed to surprise him as much as they surprised Sarah. It wasn't the commanding tone she had grown accustomed to over 5 years of marriage. It wasn't the angry demand she had expected after their physical confrontation. It was a plea, raw and vulnerable, from a man who had just realized that everything he thought he knew about his life was wrong. Sarah studied her husband's face carefully. She had seen him angry, arrogant, controlling, and manipulative. She had never seen him genuinely vulnerable. His broad shoulders, which had always seemed like a symbol of his dominance, now appeared to have the weight of the world pressing down on them. "Marcus," Sarah said gently, "I can't stay. Too much has happened." "But, you're my wife," Marcus said, though the words carried none of his usual possessive certainty. Instead, they sounded like a question, as if he was suddenly unsure what that title even meant. "Being your wife shouldn't mean being afraid of you," Sarah replied. "And it shouldn't mean giving up pieces of myself to keep you comfortable." Marcus flinched as if she had struck him again. The truth of her words cut deeper than any physical blow could have. For the first time, he was being forced to confront the reality of what their marriage had become from Sarah's perspective. "I never meant to make you afraid," Marcus said, though even as the words left his mouth, he began to question their truth. Had he not noticed her fear, or had he simply chosen to ignore it because it served his purposes? Sarah sat down in the armchair across from the couch, maintaining distance but showing that she was willing to continue the conversation. Her phone remained in her hand, still recording, but she held it less defensively now. "Do you remember our second anniversary dinner?" Sarah asked suddenly. Marcus looked puzzled by the apparent change of subject. "At Romano's?" "Of course. We had a good time. Do you remember what happened when we got home?" Marcus's brow furrowed as he tried to recall details from 3 years earlier. The evening had been pleasant, he remembered that much. They had laughed over dinner, shared a bottle of wine, talked about their future plans. "I don't, what do you mean?" "I mentioned that Maria from work had invited me to join her book club," Sarah continued. "Do you remember what you said?" The memory came back to Marcus slowly, and, with it, a growing sense of discomfort. I said you didn't need to waste time with those people. That you had everything you needed at home. And, when I said I wanted to go anyway?" Marcus's face grew pale as the full memory returned. "I got angry. I said if you needed entertainment that badly, I could find better ways to keep you busy." Sarah nodded. "You slammed your fist on the kitchen table so hard that you broke my grandmother's sugar bowl. The one she had given me before she died." "Sarah, I replaced that bowl. It wasn't about the bowl, Marcus." Sarah's voice remained calm, but Marcus could hear the pain underneath. "It was about the fact that you thought you had the right to decide what I could and couldn't do with my free time. And, when I disagreed with you, you used anger and intimidation to shut down the conversation." Marcus opened his mouth to defend himself, then closed it again. He was beginning to see a pattern in his behavior that he had never recognized before, or perhaps had chosen not to see. "The martial arts classes," Marcus said slowly, "they were your book club, weren't they?" Sarah smiled sadly. "In a way, yes. They were my way of finding something that was just mine. Something you couldn't control or take away from me." The weight of this revelation settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket. His wife had been living a secret life for 3 years because she was afraid to tell him about her interests and activities. She had felt the need to lie to him about working late because she knew he would try to stop her from pursuing something that made her happy. How many other things have you lied to me about? Marcus asked, though the question sounded more curious than accusatory. I didn't lie about anything else, Sarah said. Just the classes. But, Marcus, I shouldn't have had to lie about those either. A husband should support his wife's interests, not forbid them. Marcus leaned back against the couch cushions, his mind reeling. He was beginning to understand that Sarah's request for separation wasn't a sudden decision born from a momentary argument. It was the culmination of years of feeling controlled and constrained in her own marriage. The recording, Marcus said, gesturing toward Sarah's phone. How long have you been planning this conversation? I've been thinking about leaving for months, Sarah admitted. But, I've been preparing for this specific conversation for about 2 weeks. I knew you wouldn't take it well, and I wanted to protect myself. Protect yourself from me, Marcus repeated, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. You had to protect yourself from your own husband. Sarah didn't respond immediately, but her silence was answer enough. Marcus was forced to confront the reality that his wife viewed him as a potential threat to her safety rather than as her protector and partner. What happened to us, Sarah? Marcus asked, his voice breaking slightly. We used to be happy. We were happy when you felt like you were in control, Sarah corrected gently. But, I was only happy when I was agreeing with everything you wanted. That's not a marriage, Marcus. That's ownership. The word ownership hit Marcus like a physical blow. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the events of the past hour had shattered his confidence in his own perceptions. If Sarah could keep martial arts training secret for 3 years, if she could defend herself with skills he knew nothing about, what else had he failed to notice about his own wife? I love you, Marcus said desperately. That has to count for something. Sarah's expression softened slightly, and, for a moment, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. I know you love me, Marcus. But, love without respect isn't enough. And, you haven't respected me as an equal partner in this marriage. I can change, Marcus said quickly. I can be different. We can go to counseling. Could you really change? Sarah asked. Could you really accept a wife who has opinions that differ from yours? Who has interests you don't share? Who makes decisions without asking your permission first? Marcus opened his mouth to say yes, but the word stuck in his throat. The honest answer terrified him. He had built his entire adult identity around being the dominant partner in their relationship. Could he really accept an equal partnership with Sarah? Could he handle her having power and independence? I don't know, Marcus admitted finally, and the honesty of the admission surprised both of them. Sarah nodded as if she had expected this answer. That's why I need to leave, Marcus. You can't change while we're living the same patterns we've been living for 5 years. And I can't grow while I'm constantly worried about managing your reactions to my choices. Marcus felt tears threatening for the first time since he was a child. Everything he thought he understood about his life was crumbling around him. His marriage was ending, and he was being forced to confront the possibility that he was the reason why. What if I moved out instead? Marcus asked suddenly. What if you stayed here and I found somewhere else to live while we figured this out? Sarah looked surprised by the suggestion. In all their years together, Marcus had never offered to sacrifice his comfort for hers. The house was primarily in his name, and he had always treated it as his domain. You would do that? Sarah asked. If it meant you might give us another chance someday, Marcus said. If it meant I could prove that I can change. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering this unexpected offer. It wasn't the solution she had planned for, but it showed a level of flexibility from Marcus that she had never seen before. We would need rules, Sarah said finally. Boundaries. And I would need time to decide if I even want to try again. Marcus nodded eagerly, grasping at this unexpected lifeline. Whatever you need. Whatever rules you want. And counseling, Sarah added. Both individual and couples therapy. You would need to understand why you've behaved the way you have, and I would need to understand why I allowed it for so long. Yes, Marcus agreed immediately.
Anything.
Sarah looked at her husband, this man she had married with such hope and love, and saw perhaps the first glimpse of the person he could become. But she also knew that people rarely changed as dramatically as Marcus would need to change. The road ahead would be difficult and uncertain.
Okay, Sarah said finally. We can try.
But, Marcus, this is your only chance. If you fall back into your old patterns, if you try to control me or manipulate me again, I'm gone for good. No second chances, no explanations, no negotiations. Marcus nodded solemnly, understanding that he had just been given something he didn't deserve, hope. But, as he looked at Sarah, sitting confidently in her chair with her phone still recording their conversation, he realized something that chilled him to the bone. He was no longer afraid that she would leave him. He was afraid that she would stay and discover just how incapable of real change he might actually be. 6 months later, Dr. Rebecca Martinez closed the file on her desk and looked across her office at the couple sitting on her couch. In her 15 years as a marriage counselor, she had seen many relationships in crisis, but few had shown the dramatic transformation she was witnessing with Marcus and Sarah Thompson. Marcus sat differently now than he had during their first session. Gone was the aggressive posture, the manspreading, the way he used to dominate the physical space in her office. He sat with his feet flat on the floor, his hands folded in his lap, listening intently as Sarah spoke about her week.
The promotion came through, Sarah was saying, a note of excitement in her voice. I'll be the new head nurse for the cardiac unit.
It means longer hours sometimes, and I'll need to attend conferences in other cities. Dr. Martinez watched Marcus carefully during this announcement. 6 months ago, news like this would have triggered an explosion of jealousy and control. Marcus would have found reasons why Sarah shouldn't take the promotion, would have worried about her traveling alone, would have tried to make her success about his own insecurities. Instead, Marcus smiled broadly and reached over to squeeze Sarah's hand.
That's incredible, Sarah. You've worked so hard for this. I'm so proud of you. The transformation hadn't happened overnight.
Those first few weeks after Marcus moved out had been brutal for both of them. Marcus had rented a small apartment across town, and the loneliness had nearly broken him. Without Sarah there to control and manage, he was forced to confront the emptiness of his own life. His individual therapy with Dr. James Peterson had been particularly challenging. Dr. Peterson specialized in treating men with control and anger issues, and he had refused to let Marcus minimize or excuse his behavior. Session after session, Marcus was forced to examine the roots of his need to dominate others. Control is often about fear, Dr. Peterson had explained during one particularly difficult session. What are you afraid of, Marcus? The answer, when it finally came, had shocked Marcus with its simplicity. He was afraid of being abandoned. His father had walked out when Marcus was 8 years old, leaving him with a mother who struggled with depression and often withdrew emotionally. Marcus had learned early that the world was unreliable, and his response had been to try to control everything around him to prevent further loss. Understanding the why behind his behavior didn't excuse it, but it gave Marcus something to work with. He began to see how his attempts to control Sarah had actually been pushing her toward the very abandonment he feared most. His dominance had been a self-fulfilling prophecy, creating the exact situation he was trying to prevent. Sarah, meanwhile, was discovering who she was outside of her marriage for the first time in years. Living alone in the house, she redecorated the living room, invited friends over for dinner parties, and even joined the book club she had mentioned years earlier. Her martial arts training continued, and she had recently earned her black belt. The couple's therapy sessions had been even more intense than their individual work. Dr. Martinez had insisted on ground rules from the very first meeting: no interrupting, no raised voices, and complete honesty even when it was painful. Marcus, Dr. Martinez had said during their third session together, "I want you to tell Sarah how you felt when you found out about her martial arts training." Marcus had struggled with that question for several minutes before finally answering. "I felt betrayed. But then, I realized that I felt that way because I knew that if I had been honest about who I was, Sarah never would have needed to learn how to defend herself from me." That moment of clarity had been a turning point. Marcus began to understand that Sarah's secrecy hadn't been about deception, it had been about survival. She had been protecting herself from his controlling behavior in the only way she knew how. Now, sitting in Dr. Martinez's office 6 months later, both Marcus and Sarah were different people than they had been when their crisis began. Marcus had learned to find his sense of worth from his own achievements rather than from controlling others. He had started teaching self-defense classes at a women's shelter, using his physical training to help others rather than to intimidate them. Sarah had discovered that she didn't need to manage Marcus's emotions or walk on eggshells to maintain peace in their relationship. She could express her opinions, make her own decisions, and pursue her own interests without constant negotiation or fear of retaliation.
How are you feeling about the changes in your relationship? Dr. Martinez asked them both. Sarah spoke first. It's still strange sometimes.
I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Marcus to go back to his old patterns.
But he hasn't.
Even when we disagree about things, we actually discuss them instead of him just deciding what we're going to do.
Marcus nodded.
It's been hard giving up control, but it's also been a relief. I didn't realize how exhausting it was to try to manage everything and everyone all the time. Our relationship feels more like a partnership now. Dr. Martinez made a note in her file.
What's been your biggest challenge? Learning to trust each other again, Marcus answered.
Sarah learning to trust that I won't go back to being controlling, and me learning to trust that she won't leave just because she has the power to do so now.
It was true.
Sarah was no longer financially dependent on Marcus, having received her promotion and the salary increase that came with it. She had proven she could defend herself physically if necessary. She had a strong support network of friends and colleagues. If she chose to stay in their marriage now, it would be because she wanted to, not because she felt trapped. The night everything changed, Sarah said thoughtfully, when Marcus tried to kick me and I defended myself, I think we both learned something important.
He learned that I wouldn't be a victim anymore, and I learned that I didn't have to be.
Marcus winced slightly at the memory, though he no longer tried to avoid thinking about it. That moment had been his rock bottom, the point where he was forced to confront the reality of what he had become. But it had also been his salvation, because it had shown him that Sarah was strong enough to fight for their relationship in a way she never could when she was operating from a position of fear and weakness. Dr. Martinez, Marcus said, I need to ask Sarah something, and I want to do it here where we have support. Both women looked at him with interest. Marcus turned to face Sarah directly, his expression serious but calm.
Sarah, I know I don't deserve another chance. I know that what I put you through was wrong, and I know that you would be justified in leaving me and never looking back. But I also know that I love you more now than I ever have before, because now I love who you actually are instead of who I was trying to make you be. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. I'm asking you to come home, Marcus said.
Not as my property or as someone I can control, but as my equal partner.
I'm asking you to marry me again, essentially, because the person asking is different from the person who married you the first time.
The office fell silent except for the quiet hum of Dr. Martinez's air purifier.
Sarah looked at Marcus for a long moment, studying his face as if seeing him for the first time.
6 months ago, you tried to hurt me because I wanted to make my own decision about our relationship, Sarah said quietly. Today, you're asking me to make a decision about our relationship and promising to respect whatever I choose.
Do you see the difference? Marcus nodded.
The difference is that 6 months ago, I thought love meant ownership.
Now I understand that love means freedom. If you choose to come home, I want it to be because you choose me, not because you feel like you don't have any other options.
Sarah wiped away a tear and smiled.
Marcus Thompson, I choose you.
I choose the man you've become, and I choose to believe in the man you're still becoming.
Yes, I'll come home.
Marcus's relief was so profound that he began to cry, something he hadn't done since he was a child. Sarah moved closer to him on the couch and took his hand, and Dr. Martinez noticed that even in this moment of emotional intensity, Marcus didn't try to pull Sarah into his space. He let her come to him on her own terms. There's one more thing, Sarah said, and Marcus tensed slightly, worried that there might be conditions he couldn't meet.
Anything, he said. Sarah smiled mischievously. I want you to come to martial arts class with me. Master Chen has been asking to meet the husband who inspired me to train so hard. Marcus laughed, understanding the irony. His attempt to control Sarah had led her to become strong enough to defend herself against him, and, now that strength was part of what he loved most about her. I'd be honored, Marcus said. Though I have a feeling I'm going to be spending a lot of time on my back on those training mats.
Dr. Martinez closed her notebook and smiled at both of them.
I think we can call this a successful conclusion to your therapy.
But, remember, the work doesn't end here. You'll need to continue practicing these new patterns and communicating openly about any challenges that come up.
As Marcus and Sarah left Dr.
Martinez's office together, walking side by side rather than with Marcus leading the way, they both understood that their marriage was truly beginning for the first time. The relationship that had started with passion and ended in conflict had been reborn through honest communication and mutual respect. 6 months earlier, Marcus had pleaded for mercy after learning that his wife was stronger than he had ever imagined. Now he understood that the mercy Sarah had shown him wasn't just the decision not to leave him after he tried to hurt her. The real mercy was giving him the chance to discover who he could be when he stopped trying to control everyone around him. And Sarah had learned that sometimes the greatest strength isn't in fighting or defending yourself, but in choosing to love someone enough to give them the opportunity to change, while maintaining the power to protect yourself if they choose not to take it. Their story would become one that Dr. Martinez would remember for years to come, not because it was typical, but because it proved that even the most damaged relationships could be transformed when both people were willing to do the hard work of becoming better versions of themselves. As they drove home together to the house they would now truly share, Sarah reached over and took Marcus's hand. He squeezed it gently, grateful beyond words for the second chance he had received, and determined never to take for granted the remarkable woman who had chosen to rebuild their life together.